I'm Jim Collison, and live from our virtual studios around the world, this is Gallup's Call to Coach, recorded on June 19th, 2020. Call to Coach is a resource for those who want to help others discover and use their strengths. We have Gallup experts and independent strengths coaches share tactics, insights, and strategies to help coaches maximize the talent of individuals, teams, and organizations around the world. If you're listening live, love to have you join us in our chat room, link right above me on the live page to get in there. Or if you're listening after the fact and you have some questions, you are always welcome to email us. And I get a lot of these emails lately, coaching@gallup.com. Don't forget, if you're on YouTube, subscribe, just a way to get notified every time we create something new. And if you want to listen to this as a podcast, it is available on any podcast app. Just search Gallup Webcasts. Paul Walters is our host today. Paul's a workplace consultant here at Gallup with me. Paul, always great to have you on Called to Coach. Welcome back.
Thanks, Jim. Happy to be here.
Paul, we are going through a series on building cultures that inspire, and we've covered a bunch of different topics so far, and they're available in our series if folks go back and search on that. We just spent some time with trust and transparency and working through that. We want to dive a little bit into generational differences when we think about this, right? And it's been a topic, it's been hot, it's a little bit on the back burner right now, but it'll come back. So when we say that, Paul, when we say generational differences, what do we really mean?
Yeah, it's interesting. We actually have, with clients I work with and some of the courses I lead, generational differences comes up a lot. And essentially, I'll say this first. It oftentimes, it's maybe some older generations saying, hey, we don't understand millennials or we don't understand Gen Z. How do we work with them? How do we manage them? So oftentimes it comes from this lens of what do we do with the young people, essentially? How do we get them to perform?
Whippersnappers.
Yeah, that's right. How do we get them to do things the way we want them done? So that's oftentimes where it comes from. But when we think about generational differences, Gallup has studied this. Let me just throw out two reports that people can download. One of them is our millennial report. Now, it's a couple years old, but I think it still has some really great data in there. And then we have a Gen Z report. And our Gen Z report, Generation Z report, is much smaller, mostly because their Gen Z is born in 1997 to present, so they're still young. And because Gallup predominantly studies the workplace, there's not a ton in the workplace yet. So we're getting a sense of what Gen Z looks like in the workplace, but it's very, very small report just because we don't have a lot of data on them. But yeah, when people think about generations, they're usually thinking about 5 buckets. We've got traditionalists, baby boomers, Gen X, millennials, and Gen Z. So that's how Gallup defines the 5 different generations. And truthfully, this is a time where we might have all 5 of these actually in the workplace. Now, traditionalists mostly are out the door, but it's possible that some still exist. But for sure, we have boomers, Gen X, millennials, and Gen Z all in the workplace. And so what we hear is, hey, if we have all these different generations, how do we get them to work together? Before we talk about that, because we are going to talk about that, let me share some unique aspects of Gen Z and millennials, because that tends to be in high demand. What is different about these generations? Because that influences maybe how we manage them. So a few things about Gen Z first. Gen Z is the first generation in which white and Caucasian is not the majority. It is the most diverse generation that is out there. And that's going to have big implications, right, of what the workforce looks like, which is great. We have an increase in diversity of the future workforce. But they're the first generation to have such diversity. When I think of Gen Z, we hear a lot of different buzzwords that really seem to align and resonate for them. A few of them are entrepreneurial, technology obsessed, intrinsically motivated, good multitaskers. What we tend to see with Gen Z in terms of what they value flexibility, growth opportunities, teamwork, empowerment, and community involvement in social justice. I also think about Gen Z in terms of how they like to learn. They really appreciate mentoring and job shadowing, which makes sense, Jim, because they're younger, right? So they want to, I have to observe Jim in his role because I'd like to learn on the job. They appreciate structured feedback and hands-on experiences, along with some e-learning capabilities as well. So that ability to do the hands-on blending with e-learning because they are so connected to technology. So that's Gen Z, just some of the differences of what we see with Gen Z. Millennials have really 4 different points that I think of as different. One of them is millennials tend to be unconstrained, meaning that they don't like to be told this is the way it's always been done, so we're going to do it this way. They ask an important question to other generations in the workforce, which is why. Why are we doing it this way? And oftentimes there's really not a good answer other than this is how we've always been doing it, which tends to bother them. Then they're also unattached. That's the second thing. And when I think about unattached, what they mean by that is, as consumers, they're not attached to a particular brand. I grew up in a rural part of Iowa, a small town, a farming community, and families for generation were either Case International or John Deere. And no matter what, you were that for life. Younger farmers, millennial farmers, are saying, actually, you know what? I'm going to go where I can get the most value. And that's the difference of millennial generations, is they don't get stick with one brand. They go where the most value and aligns with their mission and purposes in the company and the company's values. The other piece with unattached is they're unattached to a particular company. So you think of other generations that would work for a company and stay there forever. I think of my grandma who worked for Colgate on the factory line literally her whole life, right? And I'm not sure that, I doubt that it was about she was really passionate about Colgate products, but it was, you were loyal to a company, they took care of you, and that's what you did. Millennials are not that way. We also see that millennials are connected, and that means they had access to technology at a young age, and they're also idealistic. They tend to be really optimistic about the world. More than any other generation, they carry the most amount of debt, and they are underemployed, yet they are more optimistic about the future compared to other generations.
Paul,
So,
on these
those two.
as we think about this, big generalizations, right? And
Oh,
are they, is this U.S.? Is our understanding of this is based on U.S. data or global data?
Yep, good question. So yes, so I'll say 2 things. One is, yes, it's U.S. data, so there's an asterisk there. The second piece I would say is, this is on average, right? When we did our research around this, it doesn't mean every Gen Z person and every millennial is exactly this way, and you should manage them this way.
Yeah. Well, and I want to say, I've had this joke going around Gallup for a long time that I might be the oldest millennial you'll ever meet, because I adhere, like many of these things, many of these traits that we've talked about they didn't necessarily emerge because of the generation, but the opportunities of that generation changed. When my dad was growing up, he didn't have a smartphone. He worked for IBM for 35 years. He was in that group, right? Born in 1930, joined a company, stayed with it, retired from it, got the Rolex watch, lived that experience, right? But he didn't have a smartphone. He wasn't connected to the internet. Now, if he had been, he might have taken some of those. And this is kind of the way I've seen it too, is that for me, there's these new opportunities. I'm on the phone just as much as any millennial. I'm 52, right? I'm on the phone as much as any millennial. The point being is, there's been some things we've discovered about how the culture is changing. In other words, we've changed from maybe paycheck to purpose. Can you talk about a few of those? Because I think this kind of drives the conversation a little bit and keeps us from stereotyping a generation, and more talks about the values that the generation has brought to the workplace.
Yeah. So I love what you said, Jim, especially, like, I feel like I'm a millennial. So what was really interesting when we looked at our data is for both generations, and we see these uniquenesses of these 2 generations. But to me, the big aha with our research around generations is that these 2 generations are actually not that different than any other generation in terms of what they want. What has happened is the millennial generation has demanded a shift in the culture of a workplace. And that culture is exactly what you said, moving from paycheck, where it's just about collecting that paycheck every other week, to purpose. I want to have mission to the work that I'm doing. I want to feel like I'm contributing to something bigger and greater than what I am. It's moving from my role to my development, meaning it's more about the opportunity for me to learn and grow. And learn and grow doesn't necessarily mean that I move up in a company, but how am I learning new things that are going to advance who I am as a person, to my intelligence, all of that. Moving from weaknesses to strengths, which I think most people are familiar with. These generations are saying, we understand what we're not good at. We don't want that to be our focal point. This is what we're good at. How can we leverage this to be successful in a role? Also moving from boss to coach, which we've talked a lot about as well. Moving to a place where I'm asking questions and I'm collaborating with you, developing you versus telling you what to do, very hierarchical. Moving from my annual review to my ongoing conversations. These generations want to have continued conversations with their managers, frequent, transparent, ongoing conversations with their people, with their managers. And that's a more effective way to manage them than an annual review. And then the last one is moving from my job to my life. Understanding, I think one of the unique things we saw with millennials is that they recognize that they spend a third of their life in their job. And so how can I find a work environment where the culture is one that allows me to live my life in my job? Meaning, hey, I've got this really important thing I want to go to at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Let me go do that. I'll work in the evening. Or I work really a lot better in the early morning hours. So I'm just going to work from like 5 a.m. to 1 p.m. and then I'll take the rest of the day off. Right. So it's adjusting people's schedules and the work environment to accommodate those individuals' lives. And the interesting thing here, Jim, and this aligns with what you said before, is that while millennials are driving this change, all generations want these things. That's what we're finding. And that's why we're seeing that there's not that big of a difference between those millennials and other generations, or Gen Z and those other generations.
Yeah, the millennials. My daughter calls herself a zillennial. She's right in between, right?
Yep.
She is that 97. No, she's 98. So she's right in between. But man, we've had tons of conversations during this time where we've been together. We've been home together a lot, talking about those values and really kind of working through those pieces. I think for the managers, for the organizations that see those strengths, that see those values, that are able to adapt their own culture to take advantage of those. And sometimes you can't, right? I mean, yeah, flex scheduling is great, but if I'm a service worker, I got to show up when the shop opens, right? If we ever get to go back to those kinds of things, right?
Yeah.
Well, and look at what, as we think about it's June 2020 and we're in the middle of this pandemic. That's also a huge disruptor in changing what does the service industry look like, and can millennials adapt and change to that, and how will that affect them and their values going forward? I think there's some incredible pieces there. When we look at the strengths of these, though, and I get a little scared when I start thinking about this, because people kind of drill a little too much into it. But we pulled some numbers and kind of looked at the strengths by generation and how they're a little bit the same and a little bit different. What do we see there?
Yeah. So I'll start with maybe traditionalists. So they have response. So first, let me talk about our global top 5. When you look at our global database, the top 5 are achiever, responsibility, relator, strategic, and learner. So those are the global top 5. And so when we look at all the generations, there's certainly some overlap, but there are some distinctions. One of those distinctions is with traditionalists. So they have responsibility, learner, achiever. The 2 unique ones that they have are connectedness and input, right? So that's a uniqueness when I think of traditionalists. Boomers and baby boomers and Gen X, they actually both have the same top 5 that fall in our global database: responsibility, learner, achiever, relator, strategic, just in different orders.
Yeah. And that may be because they've made up a bulk, right?
For sure.
Right.
They are probably the majority of our
and it's going to start changing. I think what's important is we think as Gen X and millennials, they're now the new ones taking CliftonStrengths. So talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, and millennials have 2 that come into play that are different: empathy and adaptability. empathy and adaptability, which aligns with sort of this connectedness aspect of connection, the connected aspect of millennials, because they feel like they're part of a global community. And so they might feel empathy for people around the world. And the adaptability is there, and I'm not really sure where that adaptability has come from, but it's a uniqueness to them. Gen Z has a unique number one theme, which is restorative. And for those who don't know, restorative theme, it's really about solving problems. They see problems that other people don't have. They get energy from solving those problems. So that's a unique thing that we see with Gen Z that we don't see with other generations. The other piece is they actually have adaptability as well. Now, again, asterisk here is this is our first snapshot of Gen Z. When we look at Gen Z 5 years from now and more of them are in the workplace, what that top 5 might be might shift slightly, but what we have there is pretty interesting.
Yeah, no, and certainly it's even when we think about the data collection aspect of it, these folks have opted in. This is not a statistical or sample survey type option, so we have to be very, very careful in the assumptions that we make. Certainly not use those as weapons. These are not. We should not be using these kinds of sometimes taking these themes and using them as weapons. What do we know? Okay, let's kind of wrap this up as we kind of bring it in for a landing, Paul. How it should just change the way we think and what we do, and give us some final thoughts on this.
Yeah, so I would say in a couple ways. One is, first, don't make assumptions about particular generations. Either by looking at this data and assuming all millennials are this way or Gen Zs are this way, or if these are their top 5 strengths, this is who they are. The best managers that we've talked about before individualize their approach. So I would go to your people who are millennials or Gen Z and ask them about their strengths, ask how they like to be managed, ask what they value in the workplace, and what that culture should look like, and let that inform the decision. Another piece is that what I talked about, that shift in the workplace, honoring that for all generations, because all generations want and need that. I would also say, and this goes for all generations, we see a lot of people that, the phrase "okay boomer," right, where people make fun of baby boomers, or we see the older generations talking disparagingly about the younger generations. Like you said, why those young whippersnappers? Why can't they just do things like us? Instead of doing that, what each generation should do is be thinking about, what value does this other person in this other generation bring to our department? Given their youth, what value does that actually add? Maybe it brings new ideas, maybe it brings energy. And if I'm thinking about someone who's older, what does that experience? What value does that bring to the company? What value does that bring to me? So it's always thinking about, what value do these nuances and these other generations bring to our team and to me as an individual? And I always think of the platinum rule, the reverse golden rule, which is treating others the way they want to be treated, not the way I want to be treated. So how do baby boomers want to be treated? How do millennials or Gen X or any of those want to be treated? It's in conversation with them. That's how you figure it out, and think about the value they bring versus the negative side of it.
Yeah, Paul, I can't express enough the importance of the individualization component of this with people, and that these give us hints and clues, right? Some things to talk about, but really at the end of the day, we're talking about people. And I have some coworkers that I work with that we call them old souls. They sometimes the things they do or the things they value a little bit more traditional or a little bit more old school, right? And so we need to appreciate that. Like, it's about the individual, the appreciation. I kind of go a little sideways sometimes, and I see this in the community sometimes, where we try to slap these labels on. We have the data and we show it. We do it. I always get a little leery, because then people start kind of like, then, and it leads to that. I want to say, and I think you've done a very nice job of doing this throughout it, there are some trends and there are some things to help with. At the end of the day, it's really about teams and managers and individuals working together, right? And understanding their uniqueness in it. And there may be some trends that help us out along the way. But really, at the end of the day, it's about my top 5. It's about your top 5. It's about anybody in the chat room's top 5 or the global
Yeah.
top 5 as far as how we do that. Any final thoughts before I wrap it?
Yeah, no, the last thing I'll say is that actually aligns really well with one of our guiding principles with strengths, which is themes are not labels, right? These reports are not meant to label generations as this is who they are. It's individualizing that approach and having those conversations where you can have the most value.
Yeah, no, that's great. We have these reports are available. We now have kind of a reports hub. If you search and we'll probably throw the link. I'll have Mark throw the link in the show notes for this. So after it's produced, but if you just Google Gallup reports, you'll come to our reporting page. This report, as well as a bunch of other ones, and I apologize, I didn't have it ready for the chat room, is available for you out there. You can download that and take a look. If you have trouble sleeping at night, they work well for that as well. Yeah, just a couple of reminders to take advantage of all the full resources that are available. Numbers kind of make me sleepy. So
Yeah, I'm with you.
all the resources that are available now through Gallup Access, head out to gallup.com/CliftonStrengths, and you can join us there. There's a link to our newsletter at the bottom of the page if you want to do that. We send that out monthly, and just a great way to stay up to date on all things strengths. Questions can be sent to coaching@gallup.com. Follow us on Eventbrite. Gallup.eventbrite.com will get you there. In Facebook, go to facebook.com/groups/call2coach, all one word. And on LinkedIn, you can find us by searching Clifton Strengths Trained Coaches. And we want to thank you for joining us today. Paul, maybe a few questions in the post show. So everybody hang tight if you're listening live. If you're listening to the recorded version, I bet we have another one of these. So just click play and we should have one available for you. With that, we'll say goodbye, everybody.